Hey, Twisted listeners, I'm Cindy, and this is Twisted Listers, a podcast about murder and lists. And this may be the last week that I am coming at you solo. We will see. Very exciting prospect to have Diva back, but we're not sure yet. And I apologize that I only put one out last week. It's because I was researching this case, and boy, did I. This is many, many, many pages of research, many, many hours of research. I'm super excited for this case. And the way that this case, which I will tell you what it is in just a moment, came about was when we were doing the Amish murders. I remember one of the cases I did, the man was named, his last name is Yoder, and he ended up marrying a woman named Mary. So her name became Mary Yoder. And I was thinking to myself, how do I know that name? Why is that so familiar? And it's because there is a pretty famous case surrounding the murder of a woman named Mary Yoder. And it is a really crazy, twisty, turny case. And it's what I'm going to cover today. So, this is sort of like the Amish murders just keep giving us more gifts. Um, and this is the final one probably for a little while. And this is the murder of Mary Yoder. Now, this case takes place in Utica, New York, which is in upstate New York, in 2015. And Mary Yoder is a 60-year-old married woman. She is a super fitness conscious woman. Like when you see photos of her, she's just like this beacon of like beauty and health. Like she looks healthy. She looks like beautiful and well cared for and like a woman who really cares about herself. Not just the way that she looks, but the way that she feels. And she owns a really successful chiropractic business with her husband, Bill Yoder. So these two met and were married in 1975, and they have three kids, two daughters and a son named Adam. Now, Bill is 10 years Mary's senior. So when they met or married, I guess she was 20 and he was 30, and they are very, very much in love, madly in love. They both have PhDs. They are both licensed chiropractors. They both see multiple patients per week. So it's an active, very busy chiropractor's office. They've actually owned this business together for 28 years. So they are very, very well established. They both also offer their services to nearby Amish in the Amish community, which is funny that they mentioned the Amish community because the last name Yoder is like pretty common in the Amish. So maybe Mary has, family or relatives that are Amish. I don't know. But anyway, she especially would offer her services not just to the Amish, but to anybody really in and around her town. If they couldn't afford to pay for the services, she would barter with them. And sometimes she would just do it out of the goodness of her heart. So they're really good people, really well loved and respected in the community, and Mary is especially so. Now, as I mentioned, they have two daughters who are grown and out of the house and doing really well. And then they also have their son, Adam. Now, Adam at this time, I believe, is like 27, but he's still kind of hanging around the house. He's a bit of like a troubled kid, a troubled adult, I guess. He has issues with drinking and drugs. And Mary's family would later kind of say that Mary enabled him by giving him money, just kind of excusing his actions, not really holding him accountable. Like I said, her two other children were well adjusted. Adam just had issues from the start, unfortunately. Now, Adam lived nearby and for a while worked at the chiropractor's office at the front desk, as did his girlfriend, Caitlin, who goes by Katie. Now, he and Katie met 4 years prior at her high school graduation party. I think he's like 2 years older than she is, and they quickly became inseparable. Katie was from a good family. Her parents were business owners in the area. Kind of the same situation. Like these are two really good families. The kids meet, they fall in love. It seems like a fairy tale, right? Not quite. The two had a pretty volatile relationship. They were on again, off again over the years, and Later on, Katie was described by Adam and his family as being overbearing and manipulative. At the time, I don't think anybody really knew how the relationship between the two of them went. And if you ask Katie, she would say that Adam was the abusive one at this point, but just something to kind of, keep in mind. Um, the two, like I said, they kept their drama to themselves, but at one point, I'll get more into this later. Katie used a not a pregnancy test, but like a fake pregnancy to get Adam to get back together with her, even though he had another girlfriend. So there's a lot of weird shit going on between them. Mary was also really close with Katie. They were super tight because Adam never aired the dirty laundry and his parents never knew what was going on between them. So all they saw was like this really great side of Katie and they became very close. And again, like I said, Katie was working at this chiropractor's office and had basically since they started dating. She'd been working there for like 4 years. Mary was also really close with her older sister, Kathy, who lived nearby and was somewhat recently widowed. Now, apparently Kathy had some sort of neurological condition that didn't leave her unable to care for herself, but it was thought to somewhat affect her judgment, and this is something that'll come into play kind of later on. So these are kind of the major characters, the big players in this case. I mean, there's like some detectives and cops, but you guys know I never really focus on their names because I don't really give a shit about them. But they are also in this story. But aside from that, like, it's basically these family members that kind of all play a role in this story. So now we're in the summer of 2015. It's July 20th to be exact. It's a Monday, and Mary's going into work. Bill actually takes Mondays off. So he's home. She gives him a kiss goodbye. She goes into the office to take care of her appointments. And she's actually hoping to get out a little bit early that day. She just wants to enjoy the day. It's Bill's day off. She wants to go home and be with him. She's super excited because Bill had just surprised her with a trip to Europe. So they'd always wanted to go, and they're finally going to do a month-long trip, just travel around, have a great time, and she's so excited about this. So she gets through all of her morning appointments, and then she sits down for a quick lunch that consisted of a protein shake. She had actually originally gone to her mother's house for lunch, but apparently her mother had already eaten, so they just visited for a little while, and then Mary came back to the office, had a quick shake, and got back to her patients. About an hour later, Mary started to feel unwell. And within about another hour or two, she was feeling so unwell that she had to tell Katie to cancel her appointments because she had to go home. She's like, I'm too sick. I have to go home. She goes home, and immediately when Bill sees her, he can see she's pale, she's sick, and she begins vomiting immediately and repeatedly. And she's also suffering from like really bad diarrhea. She just feels terrible. So Bill's pretty worried, but Mary's like, you know what? This is a stomach bug. I'll be fine tomorrow. I'm going to sleep on the couch and just deal with it. Go up to bed. Just check on me in the morning. I'll get through this. And like, I can tell you right now that that's like something I've done. I've told Rory, like, I have the stomach flu. Stay the fuck away from me. I don't want you to get it. And when he gets the stomach flu, same difference. Like, he will just handle it. I'll keep it to myself. I'll take care of the kid. So it makes sense that that's kind of what they would do. The next morning, however, Mary still isn't doing better. Like, she's still vomiting. She still has diarrhea. There's not even anything left in her, and she's still going. So Bill calls one of their daughters, who's a doctor, and she suggests that they go to the hospital because she's like, Mom is going to be super dehydrated. She can't stop throwing up. Like, take her there, get her on an anti-nausea medicine, like, have them take care of her. Bill takes Mary, and they admit her. They're like, yep, you're in bad shape. We're going to get you in a bed. Pretty quickly after this, within 7 or 8 hours, she starts to recover to the point where she's like not getting up to vomit and like mostly feeling better. And as the night wears on, they're expecting like, okay, she'll stay the night, she'll go home tomorrow. That's basically what the doctors are expecting. The family's expecting it. Everybody's thinking like, all right, she's going to go home and feel better. That being said, the family is now kind of all alerted to what's going on, like both daughters, her son, the whole family. So one of her daughters who lives on Long Island has decided, I'm going to come in for the weekend. I'll help around the house while you feel better. I'll help take care of things. Now, one of the reasons that the family is on such high alert is that a few months prior to this, Adam had actually got sick with a similar kind of thing, either like a virus or whatever. And it took him a couple of weeks to fully recover. So I'll talk more about that later. But this basically had the family thinking like, oh, this might not just be like, go home and then get back to your normal life. So they're thinking, all right, we'll come home for the weekend, help support mom, make sure she's doing okay, right? Now, while she's still in the hospital, Bill visits Mary, of course. He goes home, he gets her some of her stuff, namely an inhaler and some other medication. So Mary's going to stay overnight, like I said. Like, she hasn't actually stayed overnight yet, but they do plan to. But they're like, yep, you'll go home the next day. We just want to kind of, you know, observe you for the night. Around 4:30 a.m. the following morning, Bill is awakened by loud pounding on his door. Now he comes to the door and it's the police. And they have come to let him know that the hospital has been calling him all night. Now, they may have sent the police because they were worried about Bill. It's like, we're calling you, calling you, calling you. You're not answering. Your wife's in the hospital. What's going on? So, they send the police. They, wake him up. Bill, it turns out, just had his cell phone in another room. He was like charging it and had not heard it going off. And I guess they didn't have like a home phone. So he rushes down to the hospital, and it turns out that all night Mary had gotten way worse. She fell out of bed trying to go to the bathroom and had actually gone into cardiac arrest and actually died and was brought back to life by doctors 6 times. Her entire family came to the hospital that morning. They all rushed in, and they were basically told by the doctors that Mary is dying, but nobody could figure out why. And almost immediately after her last daughter arrived at the hospital, Mary went into her final cardiac arrest and succumbed to her illness. She was pronounced dead on July 22nd, 2015, at the age of 60. Now, the medical examiner performed an autopsy, and this isn't something that happens regularly when people die in the hospital, but they couldn't figure out why she died. So they're like, all right, we're going to do an autopsy because this is a fucking weird ass unexplained death. Bill was like, yes, please do this. I want answers. The rest of Mary's family was like, we all want answers. How does a super healthy woman who was only 60 years old just up and die in less than 48 hours? Like, what the fuck? Now, they're waiting on this autopsy. Everybody's upset. Obviously, they hold like not a vigil. It's not like her funeral either. It's like a memorial service. And there's like 250 people. And this is not a big town. So Mary was very, very, very well loved. Now, after kind of all of this settles down, they get the autopsy back, and it was found that her organs had all started failing. So she had actually gone into multi-organ failure, like a full body shutdown. And doctors, or the medical examiner, I guess, said that her organs looked like she was like a long-time drug user or suffered a very long-term illness. Neither one of these things are true. So obviously something is definitely up. So to be clear on this right now, the police are not in any way investigating Mary's death. So that the medical examiner wanted to know why she died, but at this time it was not at all considered suspicious, just weird. So the medical examiner looks at slides of her organs, and he finds that the cells are killing themselves, which is not normal even with like people with like who have diseases. So to him, this means she was poisoned. So he now looks at her symptoms through the lens of, could this have been a poisoning? Meanwhile, the family like super quickly cremates her body, like next week kind of thing. So he doesn't have a lot of like tissue samples or things to use, but luckily he does have 1 vial of blood left. Now he's looked over everything that he has. He's used up all of his samples, but he has this 1 vial of blood, and he has a theory. And he uses this blood to test his theory. And his theory is that Mary may have been poisoned using colchicine, which is a super unique drug that is not often used in poisonings because it's not easy to get. So this has some very specific symptoms and a sort of timeline for these symptoms that matched Mary's illness and death like pretty much exactly. So these findings came 2 months after Mary's death and still did not kickstart a police investigation, which is interesting because the family knew that she had been poisoned, and her husband and her son did not choose to report it to police. What did kickstart the investigation was Mary's sister, Sharon, calling the police and being like, hey, guess what? My sister was poisoned. Can you please look into this? Police are like, abso-fucking-lutely, sorry we missed that, because that's how they roll. And they start talking with the medical examiner, and they're like, yep, this is suspicious. This is poisoning. This was a murder. They then start to kind of focus on Bill because he's the husband. And we'll get into why in a second. But they basically, they ask him, or they basically tell him, like, we're going to get a warrant and search your home. And he's like, you know what? No problem. Go ahead and search it. So they look at Mary's vitamins, they look through her shakes, her proteins. They kind of basically are just looking for any evidence that the poison was in the house or had been administered to her while she was at the house. Mary took vitamins every day, so this would have been a really easy way to poison her. So they're looking through all of this stuff. Bill cooperates, the pills are tested, they don't find anything. Police are not deterred, though. They're going to keep looking because this was a super horrific death. So whoever did this is a scary, scary fucking monster. This is not a good way to die. Meanwhile, people in town kind of start gossiping. And the one thing that they gossip about with regard to Bill is that he has taken up with Mary's other sister, Kathy. Now, Mary has 3 sisters, or 4 sisters. I think she has 4 sisters and 2 brothers. So one of them, Sharon, reported this and was like, hey, cops, can you help us out? Another one, Kathy, started dating Bill. And the rumor mill starts, they were seeing each other before Mary's death. Bill did it. This is a whole big salacious thing, which I think like fair. If your wife dies and within a couple of months you're dating her sister, it's going to raise some red flags, and rightfully so. In fact, Bill and Mary's daughter, I believe her name was Liana, was actually the one to suggest that Bill reach out to Kathy after Mary's death because Kathy had also, like I mentioned, recently lost her partner. But people love to gossip, and suddenly Bill and Kathy have been dating for months, which like maybe they were. We don't know. But also, again, this investigation started 3 months after Mary's death. So even if they had started dating a couple of months back, it was still after Mary's death, or probably. And I say probably because there was definitely a little bit of credibility being lent to this gossip because a neighbor of Kathy's came forward and said that she saw the two of them making out on Kathy's porch prior to Mary's death. And this rumor gets back to police, and police hear about this neighbor's firsthand account, and they start to take a much more serious look at Bill. So again, they sort of push on him saying, we're going to get a warrant. We're going to do this, that, and the other. We want to look at your computers. And he's like, have at it. You can look through everything I've ever fucking owned. My house, my car, my business. Just go through anything you want. I just want answers. So he's not acting suspicious, but as we all know, that doesn't really mean anything. And he's brilliant. He's really, really smart. And people who are really, really smart oftentimes will think that they're smarter than everybody else, and no matter what, they're going to get away with things, and oftentimes that's their downfall. So again, not acting suspicious to me doesn't mean one thing or another. Now, around this time, we're looking, 6 months or so after Mary's death, 2 anonymous letters are sent through the mail, one to the sheriff and one to the medical examiner. Now, these letters are identical. They're typed, and they're not signed, obviously, they're anonymous. And they both say the same thing. And so I'm going to refer to them from now on as the letter, because it's the same fucking letter. And this letter says some crazy, crazy shit. According to this letter, the person who killed Mary was in fact not Bill, but was none other than her troubled son, Adam. This letter goes on to say that the reason he did it was that he was upset at her not paying enough attention to him, and he also thought he would get an inheritance from her death. Now, as I said, Adam at this time is 25 years old, so the attention thing seems really weird, but Mary is an enabler, so it's not that far out there that maybe he was feeling entitled to her and she wasn't giving him what he wanted and he was mad about it, right? The money thing could have definitely been a motive, even though in the end, Adam didn't get anything. She didn't have like life insurance. She didn't have, a lot of money saved. So her death didn't really help him financially, but it doesn't mean he knew that. Like he didn't necessarily know that. The letter goes on to say that the poison used was colchicine, which was not something that had been released to the public or even really the family at that time. They had told the family, like, hey, she was poisoned, the medical examiner, but the medical examiner knows better than to tell them the specifics because what if it's one of them, right? So the fact that this letter is pointing out that it's colchicine means that the person who wrote it was either told this by the killer or they themselves are the killer, right? Further, the letter stated that police would be able to find the colchicine underneath the passenger seat of Adam's Jeep and that it would be wrapped in cardboard. So police take this letter. They do not immediately suspect Adam, just so you know. In fact, they think that maybe Bill wrote the letter to throw people off the trail, and that if he did this, that he is one cold motherfucker to frame his own son. But this is not the first time we would have seen that. Remember the woman with the antifreeze? She got caught because she didn't know how to say antifreeze. Anyway, that's a story for another time. It's actually on the podcast. But anyway, they're thinking like, if this guy is the mastermind we think he is, he very well could have done this to kind of throw cops off the scent. Regardless, police do have Adam come in for an interview, of course, because maybe it's true. They immediately thought the letter was bullshit, but they also were like, whoever sent this in is probably the killer. So they go ahead, they tell him about the letter. Adam immediately lawyers up, but he does also cooperate, and he allows the police to search his Jeep because his lawyer that he got said basically, like, if you truly have nothing to hide, let them do it. So he does. And they look under the passenger seat, and there it is, a bottle of colchicine, just like the letter said. Police on the scene later said that Adam was there while they were searching the car. He was standing outside smoking a cigarette, and when they pulled the bottle of colchicine out, his face was so shocked that the cigarette nearly fell out of his mouth. So cops were basically like, based on his reaction, we don't think he did it. Now, again, this could have totally been colored by kind of their preconceived notions about Bill. At the time, all of the cops thought it was Bill. So it's easier to believe somebody's like shocked face if you already believe them off the bat, right? Anyway, along with the colchicine, there was a receipt for the purchase with an email address that read Mr. Adam Yoder 1990 at gmail.com. It also showed that the colchicine had been mailed to the family business, which means that someone there received the package. And it also showed that means somebody at the family business ordered this because it obviously was ordered to the business. So this is a little bit of a paper trail, obviously. Now, Adam denies having ever made or used that email. He's like, it's not my email. It sounds similar to other emails that I have, but that's not my email address. So police now have to look more into this email address to make sure it's not actually his, which in 2015 is pretty simple, tracing an IP, figuring out where something was created. Obviously, like Gmail accounts, they're created anonymously. Like you can't, like you don't have to like there's not a paper trail in that it's like, oh, well, Cindy did this. But they can say, oh, it was on this IP address, which is connected to this computer, right? So Adam continues to deny his involvement. The police believe him. And also, one of the reasons they believe him, on top of everything else, is that he actually had an alibi. They had proof that he wasn't in town when his mother was poisoned and hadn't been in town for the better part of a week. And to understand why that is significant, because it's like, well, maybe he was like with antifreeze, you can poison somebody over the course of, months, and then they'll get sick enough to die. You may not be in town at the time. But how the timeline for this poisoning works, I'm going to talk a little bit about colchicine so we understand kind of what happened. So colchicine is a drug used for the treatment of gout, and weirdly is also used in gardening to increase polyploidy in plants, which can mean a bunch of things that are way over my head. But I know that it helps with variety in plants, and as we'll learn later, it can also help with determining the sex of plants. Now, colchicine is not a controlled substance, but it is a really dangerous drug, and you can't just get it. They're not just going to give it to anybody. If you end up taking more than the prescribed amount, you can get very, very sick or even die. So it's insane to me that this is something that is prescribed. So if you look on the instructions on one of these bottles for how to take it and what to do, it's fucking terrifying. It's like, don't double up doses. If you miss one, skip it. If you start to get crazy diarrhea or feel like you're on another planet, stop taking it and call your doctor. And it's like, dude, why would you even I'll take the gout. Thank you very much. This shit is super fucking deadly. So if you overdose, also, you will die. There is no cure at all for colchicine poisoning. So if you take too much, if you take enough to make you sick but not kill you, you will recover. But once you hit that threshold, you're fucking done. You're not coming back. So even if doctors know that that's what happened to you, they're basically like, well, sorry, you're going to die now. And the death is fucking horrible. So within 1 to 24 hours after ingesting it, you're going to spend between 10 and 24 hours having severe diarrhea, stomach cramping, vomiting, all the horrible things that Mary had. The following 24 hours or so are even worse, with, just like what Mary had, multi organ failure, cardiac arrest, and eventually death. Symptoms can start, like I said, as quickly as 1 hour after ingestion, as it seems that they may have with Mary, and typically no more than 10 to 24 hours after ingestion, which would mean that Adam would have not been home when Mary took the poison. It was a fresh, shake that she had. She wasn't eating like old packaged items, things that had been open. So there's really no way that he would have been able to do this. Also, in order to get your hands on this drug, you have to be a licensed doctor and also send a letter of intent for purchasing. And more specifically to this case, in the state of New York, chiropractors are not allowed to prescribe medication, so there's no reason that Mary and Bill would have had this in their offices. So there's no way that she would have accidentally taken it either. So Adam is looking less and less like a suspect, mostly because he really did have an alibi, and police are still pretty locked in on Bill, thinking, he's this criminal mastermind. This is sort of backed up though. Like, it's not just the cops thinking this, but like Sharon told police, Sharon is Mary's other sister. Oh yeah, I already mentioned her. Sorry. So she tells police it was probably Bill. They'd never catch him if it was him because he was so fucking smart. So police are like, all right, we're going to keep a close eye on Bill. And we're going to start looking into the receipt for this. We're going to start looking at the email address. We're going to start like putting the pieces together. So they trace back the purchase using the receipt. They find the colchicine was bought using prepaid gift cards, which is super, super suspicious as well. They also find that it had been bought all the way back in January 2015, so about 6 months before Mary was poisoned, which shows a lot of forethought about this, right? This was planned. Police decide to interview Adam's ex-girlfriend, Katie, as she is the current office manager. She probably has a lot of insight into Bill and Mary's relationship. She's super close with Mary. She spends a lot of time with the family. And they're thinking like, okay, she's going to be able to help us figure out what the hell's going on. Maybe she remembers receiving the colchicine. Maybe she remembers Bill purchasing it. Let's talk to her and see what we can find. Now, by this time, police had also done a lot of research into Bill, and one of the things they found, and I kind of love this about him, was that in the 70s he had a pot farm, and he was real, real into it. Now, like Sharon said, he was brilliant, super smart, had a PhD, he knows what he's doing, and if he gets into something and he's interested in it, he's going to take it all the way with his education. So it was said or found, I don't know, I couldn't substantiate this, but I read this, that he had actually used colchicine in the 70s to help ensure that all of his pot plants were female, because females are the ones that give you the weed, if you didn't know that. So apparently Bill already had some sort of like knowledge of this drug and how to use it for gardening. So it really feels like the pieces of the puzzle are really falling into place here, and it's all signs point to Bill, right? So they start talking to Katie. They're like, she's going to really give us the final push with all the info that we need, and we're going to nail this guy. Now, around this time, police also DNA tested the letters, including the envelope. They don't yet have the results, but they're like, let's really drive this home with touch DNA to make sure we know, yes, Bill sent this. So they bring Katie in and she answers their questions and she's super helpful, but she also seems really locked in on Adam being the killer and not Bill. And she tells police, I think it was Adam. Adam was upset at his mother. She cut him off financially. And it turns out that Mary had actually put her foot down and stopped giving him money. And the two had been on pretty bad terms since then, and that had been just a few months ago. Adam had also quit the practice after his most recent and kind of final breakup with Katie. So he was like working part-time, didn't really have his shit together. Katie also mentioned that he was in debt over $20,000 and had asked his mom to help pay that off. That was the specific thing he was asking for. And she said no, because, no. And he was upset because he feels, I don't know, entitled to her, I guess. But again, he has this really solid alibi and police know this. So at first they're kind of like, maybe she's just wrong in her suspicions. But they keep talking to her and they're kind of like, it's weird that she's like so sure it was him. So they push her a little bit more. They kind of talk about the letter, and she says something about the letter that she shouldn't have known. And I don't know exactly what it was, but it was not good. And it set off like a red flag for detectives, right? So at the time the guy's like, like thinking in his head, like, how did she know that? And he just goes for it. And he asks her, like, hey, by the way, did you write that letter? And Katie says, yes, I did. So they're like, okay, this this girl wrote this letter that had really specific information about Mary's murder, and she's saying it's Adam. We know it's not Adam. So now Katie becomes the prime suspect. And this is like out of the blue for them. They were not expecting this. Later on in this same interview, they ask her, hey, did you buy the gift cards that were used to buy this culture scene? And she's like, no, I didn't. And they're like, well, that's interesting because we have, CCTV footage of you buying them. And this was a lie. They didn't have shit, but they just like Hail Married it and were like, let's see what happens. And she fucking folds like immediately. And she's like, okay, yeah, I did buy them. So now they have her writing the letter. They have her buying the prepaid cards. So they're like, all right, we have to figure out what the fuck is going on. Now, this comes up later as well, but I'm just going to bring it up now since it's kind of talking about this. But the woman who put the order through for Art Chemical, where the culture scene was bought, now this is 2 years ago, so take this with a grain of salt, or 2 years before she was interviewed. But she said, oh yeah, I remember I had to call their office because the first payment didn't go through because the original prepaid card didn't have enough money on it. And I spoke with a young woman who approved the purchase and then sent through the second form of payment that was enough money. So this is sort of backing up that Katie bought the drugs, right? So now let's talk a bit about Katie and Adam's relationship before we get more into why the fuck she might have done this. Katie and Adam, like I said, had a very on again, off again relationship. And even though they were broken up at the time of Mary's death, there was always like a possibility that they're going to end up back together, right? Because they had so many other times. As I mentioned, Adam had drug and alcohol issues, and apparently he would have blackouts where he'd go into like violent fits of rage, like from time to time. I couldn't find anything specific that he did to anybody else, but one time after the two of them broke up, Katie accused Adam of rape and assault, saying that he attacked and raped her during one of his blackouts. She told Adam that she had cuts, bruises, and bites on her body. Adam didn't remember any of this, but he was the kind of like he is the kind of guy I think that's like very self-loathing, very low self-esteem. So his immediate thing wasn't like, I didn't fucking do that, but it was like, oh my God, I don't remember that. So she is like, I have photos of the attack. So she tells him this. She didn't tell him about this for like months. I think she basically waited until they broke up and then brought it up, which is like, listen, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm not going to sit here and say that like she is lying. I'm just saying it's important to know when she brought this up. So she tells him she has photos of the attack, but when she did send him photos of the bruises, first of all, she only sent him photos of the bruises, not the cuts, not the bites, only the bruises. And the bruises did not match the areas on her body where she had originally said she had been bruised. So again, she didn't report this to police or Adam, and she did both, by the way, until about 3 months after the fact. Again, I'm not saying it didn't means it doesn't happen, but it's weird that she came up with these photos so far after the fact. And in fact, it was later found that she took these photos at the time she reported the assault and not when she said it had happened. Now, again, this doesn't mean it didn't happen. And it is a well-known fact that Adam did have these outbursts, did have a lot of issues with drugs and drinking, but it's not a great look that she fabricated these photos. And it kind of plays into this thing that she does where she uses situations to get Adam back in her life once he's decided to break away from her. Another example of this was a more recent time that they had broken up, like more recently before the murder. And Adam had actually moved on to somebody else. He was in a pretty happy, normal relationship. He was working full time. He got his own place. Things were starting to come together for him. Now, he had done this in a short amount of time. So he and Katie had been hooking up until like just before he sort of was like, I'm getting away from you. I'm dating this new girl. I'm going to get my shit together, right? So suddenly, after he finally pulls away from her, Katie reaches out and she tells him, oh my God, Adam, I was in the hospital last night. I suffered an ectopic pregnancy. I almost bled out and died. So she tells him this, but she's already home. Now, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you're not going to get out of the hospital 12 hours later, and you're not going to be like fine. But she was fine, and Adam met up with her. He doesn't know this. He's just worried. She gets him to have sex with her. They end up hooking up, and then she convinces him, break up with your girlfriend be with me again. So this is how they end up getting back together. I will also say that according to a book I read, which I'll talk more about later, there was no evidence at any of the area hospitals that Katie had ever been there. So we're starting to see a little bit of a pattern here. She creates these situations, these big dramatic things as a way of pulling Adam back into her kind of web, right? So after the last time they broke up, she kind of pulled this again. She loaned Adam the $20,000 to get out of debt. The money she told police that he was in debt. He was in debt to her. So he had been in debt to somebody else, and then she loaned it to him. And then she kind of used this to hold over his head, to keep them communicating, to keep some modicum of control over Adam. So when he wasn't immediately getting back together with her, she started sending him texts saying, like, I want my money right now, and like, I'm going to charge you compound interest and all this crazy shit to get under his skin, to keep the conversation going, to keep him interacting with her so she can eventually convince him to be with her again. Which is like, the whole thing is ridiculous. It's just like this big, crazy fucking thing. So as far as the outward view of their relationship, though, everybody thought that they were breaking up and getting back together, but nobody thought it was like this. Katie was a smart, hardworking person. She had her shit together. She has like a business degree. She's had the same job for 4 years. She's a very reliable person, right? Adam is a fucking mess and maybe not the greatest guy. But in this situation, it really does seem like Katie was manipulating him quite a lot. And like I said, Adam's parents had no idea about any of this because Adam even went out of his way to tell them, whatever's going on between me and Katie, it shouldn't affect your relationship with her. I don't want you to fire her. I don't want anything bad between you. And his parents, like, they honored that and they were fine with it. And they were like, if it was bad enough, he wouldn't be telling us this. So whatever's going on between them, it's probably fine. Or honestly, they maybe low-key thought whatever's going on between them, it's probably Adam's fault because he's such a fuck up, right? So anyway, clearly, Adam's got issues with self-confidence and self-worth, and Katie's got a lot of control shit going on. So back to this police interview. Now, Katie admits she wrote the letter, and when they ask her why, she said, I'm afraid of Adam. He told me that he killed his mother, and that, he did it because of their falling out, and I'm scared. Again, police are like, they know he didn't do it, so Katie's the prime suspect. They take this evidence that they have, basically her own fucking confessions, and they take it to a judge, and they ask for a search warrant to search her phone and like her home computer, her work computer, and they are granted this. Now, Bill could have given them access to the work computers and probably also already did, but now they have the warrant. So the first thing they do is they look into the Mr. Adam Yoder 1990 email account, and they find that it was not only created on the work computer that was primarily used by Katie, but the only other two devices to have access to it are Katie's home computer and her personal phone, which has a fucking Gmail app with the email signed in. They also find that the password for the email is Adam is gay, which is fucking ridiculous, but also definitely not something like he or his dad would have come up with if they were like creating this account, right? The next bit, this they find out later on, but I'm going to just like lump it in here because we're talking about it. Eventually, they did find that Katie had a ton of deleted notes and files on her phone, including a note that had a bunch of mathematical equations on it, including a bunch to like try to throw cops off the trail. I think in case it ever was found, but kind of dead center in all of this, there's a math equation that very clearly shows she's attempting to work out the lethal dose of colchicine for a person weighing 180 pounds, which was how much Adam weighed. So she was, at least at some point, as far as the cops are concerned, thinking about killing Adam. There was also a cam scanner app, I think that's what it's called, that was used to upload documents used to buy the colchicine, including a document supposedly signed by Mary and either Adam or Bill, and also the letter of intent. And I'll talk about the letter of intent again later, but it comes back to kind of the weed growing operation. They also found a deleted fake Facebook post. Okay, this to me, this is it. Like, I could end the podcast right here. This is the piece of evidence against Katie that I cannot get past. They find a Facebook draft that had been deleted of a post by Katie that talks about how much she misses her mentor and friend, Mary Yoder, because Mary had died. This shit was written before Mary was even sick. So she was like practicing what she was going to say after Mary died. So to me, that's it. We're done. But there's so much more. So let's keep going. So obviously, the police arrest Katie. They charge her with murder. To be clear, there is zero hard evidence that she did this. Now, they did get the DNA back from the letter, and it was found to have female DNA on it. They couldn't directly track it back to her. There was just no way to do it. But it did show that it was a woman who touched it. And her DNA was also found on the bottle of colchicine. But the problem with that is that Katie not only accepted all of the packages at the office, but she also obviously spent time in Adam's Jeep. So that tiny little bit of like DNA proof wasn't really considered as such because there's a completely rational reason for why she may have touched these things. The letter was a little bit different, but again, they couldn't like definitively link it to her. They just knew that it wasn't a man who touched it, which means Bill's out, Adam's out. But the circumstantial evidence that they do have is pretty damning. It's not proof in the pure sense of the word, but it's something. So they go to trial. The prosecutor wants her for first-degree murder. The prosecutor is a woman. She's confident that she's going to get this conviction, and Katie's going to go to prison. Now, it did take a while for them to choose a jury, mostly because both families were so well known in the area. Like I said, Katie's family were, business owners, super active in the community, known to be a very good family. So it was hard to find people who weren't involved in the case. But eventually they got it together. They put together a jury, and in 2017, they went to court. Katie's attorney took the defensive strategy of basically going on the offense, really driving home that Bill was the one to blame. The lawyer said, he was having an affair. The neighbor saw it. That's really the only hard evidence of the affair. And, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. But he also pointed to the fact that Bill had inherited $400,000 recently and that he needed the money he inherited to retire because he had blown his and Mary's entire retirement promoting his newest book, which was a complete flop. The idea that the defense put forward was that two people couldn't possibly retire on $400,000, but one person definitely could. Now, on the other hand, Bill and Mary were planning on selling their business, which was super well established, like I said, 28 years. But this might have taken a few years and a lot of work on their part. So basically, what the defense was saying is Bill wanted to take a shortcut. He didn't want to fucking wait. They also noted that the night that Mary died, Bill was unreachable, which is super strange because if your wife is that ill in the hospital, why would you not have your cell phone nearby, right? Like, that's just weird. I get it that like he thought she was getting better. Also, he's a 70-year-old man. Like old men don't, they just do weird fucking shit. But anyway, it was something to call out. They also said, Bill and Adam both had access to that work computer, and they easily could have put a cloning app on Katie's, whatever her phone that then linked to her home computer, and they could have like manipulated this and framed her for murder. They also pointed out the obvious lack of a motive for Katie, although I find it weird that the prosecution didn't suggest the obvious, which to me is obvious that she was just trying to get back together with Adam, or trying to get back at him. Either she was trying to punish him or trying to find a way to manipulate him into getting close to her again. That to me seems the obvious motive. And in fact, that did happen for the first month or so after Mary's death. The two of them again became close. Like, she was his shoulder to cry on. I think the reason that the prosecution didn't really lean on this, though, was that Katie had actually been dating another man for about 5 months when this happened, so it would have been harder to sell. Even though, looking through kind of everything we know now, it seems real obvious. In a court, you can't just throw everything out on the table like this. This is so much speculation, On the other hand, just going back again, the colchicine was bought in January, before Katie had this new boyfriend. So it could have been something she'd been planning before then and just decided to go through with, even though she was dating someone else. Clearly, this new man didn't mean a lot to her because she and Adam did in fact reconnect. So anyway, that was kind of a flip-flop there. But basically they didn't really present a motive in the trial because they didn't have anything that wasn't super fucking shaky. Now, during the trial, like I said, there wasn't as much information about her phone as I've outlined. So they didn't have the Facebook post. They didn't have the math notes. They didn't have her searching for different kinds of poison, which they did later find. So it was a little less circumstantial evidence than what we now know. So they kind of just went in with like her confessions and like the colchicine and the email address. Now, as I mentioned, the prosecutor didn't want to compromise on the charge and only went for first degree murder. Now, the book that I referenced for this, in large part, is called "We Thought We Knew You" by M. William Phelps. It has a very specific take on this, which I take with a grain of salt. It basically paints Katie as this cold-hearted killer, hell bent on controlling every aspect of Adam's life. And I've taken a lot of what I've said so far from that book. I do also think that this guy kind of brought in like a sex kitten aspect a little bit. He goes in the book, he does everything from like speculate about her selling her dirty underwear online to saying that she was like flippant and even like joyful during her trial, seemingly unworried about the outcome. And later, this author claimed it's because she had a friend on the jury, but again, that wasn't something I could substantiate. So, again, I just want to call this out because everything that I've kind of said against Katie comes from a book that has a definite opinion about the case, definitely thinks that she is guilty. So, just want to call that out. Because what I'm going to tell you next is that at the end of this trial, the jury ends up being deadlocked and a mistrial is declared. They couldn't get past the reasonable doubt of this case. There's no hard evidence, and it really could have been Bill or even Adam who killed Mary because of the access to the computer, because, the way the colchicine was bought. Now, the thing I want to talk about the colchicine that really was kind of in Katie's favor is that the letter of intent that you have to write that was written to Art Chemical used really um kind of like specific scientific terms that like a 22 or 24-year-old girl who had a business degree wouldn't know anything about. Basically, the letter of intent was written saying we want to use this for gardening and went into really in-depth kind of details about how they wanted to use it. Now, the defense basically said, who's the person out of all these people who's going to be able to write that letter and say this shit and make it believable? Well, it's Bill, because he had a pot farm and he used the colchicine. So he knows how to use it. He knows all the scientific terminology for everything. So it makes sense that he would have written this letter and not her. But Bill's straight up like, I had nothing to do with this. Adam had nothing to do with this. Mary certainly didn't order it. So that casts a lot of doubt. Like, how could this girl come up with such a sophisticated letter? And again, she's smart. She's wily. Who knows how she did it? I'm not saying she didn't do it. I'm saying that this cast more reasonable doubt on her on her guilt. And I mean, to be fair, they all had motive, especially if Bill was having an affair, which I don't really think he was. But we'll get more into that later too. So Katie was released, and the prosecution decided to go after her again. So she was released for a while, but I believe either later in 2017 or early 2018, they went to trial again. Now, at this time, Katie got different lawyers, and the defense tried kind of a different tactic. They decided to blame Adam, or sort of Adam and Bill together, for Mary's murder. Also, before this trial, this is when the computer and cell phone evidence really came into play. Adam found that Katie had linked her cell phone to his computer for some reason and like backed it up. And so he had access to all of her files, including the deleted items. Now, this is where they found the Facebook deleted post. A bunch of the stuff that they found was like in that notes, like the notes app on your iPhone. Even if you delete it, apparently you can recover it. And so all of this was on his computer, and they could have access to it because it was his computer. She put that stuff on there. So now it's his and it's the cops. He's given it to the cops like, yeah, please use this, right? So as you can imagine, the prosecution has a heyday with this, and the defense is basically trying to say, well, Adam and Bill are like computer masterminds who, hacked into her phone and her home computer and used the other computer. So, this isn't her that did this, right? Also, I mentioned that Adam had fallen ill with similar symptoms to Mary's about 3 months prior to her death. Well, to elaborate on that, he and Katie had been broken up but still talking, as is their way, and he told her he was having trouble concentrating and it was affecting his ability to work. Now, Adam had ADHD, or has ADHD, and Katie knew this. So Katie gave him a bottle of these pills called Alpha Brain, and these were meant to help with focus. So he takes one and he tells her, that didn't really do much. And she's like, well, take another one. So the next day he takes another pill, and about an hour later, he starts to feel super ill. Now, at one point, he jokingly, quote unquote, texted Katie saying, "Oh, I hope you didn't poison me." So there is that. The defense, as I said, kind of takes this and they're like, Adam could have made that up about the text, or maybe he was like setting the scene. You know what I'm saying? So they're taking this, the tack, they're going to blame Adam. And they, like I said, they tried to tie Bill and Adam to this, saying they conspired together to frame Katie since they both had a financial motive and Bill wanted to be with Mary's sister Kathy. They point to the fact that Adam and Katie did share an Apple ID, meaning that on top of sharing the work computer, he also had access to anything in her cloud, which is where most of this evidence kind of came from. And again, they tried to say, Bill could have put these searches for poison on the computer at work. He could have linked them to her phone and her home computer using some sort of hacker program. But the flip side of that is, again, 70-year-old man, probably not like super savvy with computers. And maybe he is, but like this is a very far-fetched thing regardless. Even so, the defense supported this by pointing out that Katie did not have a security lock or password on her phone. So it's like they can easily access her phone. They can easily access her work computer. The only thing they don't have easy access to is her home computer. But again, there's apps that can do that. They also pointed to Bill and Adams cremating Mary's body like the same week she died, even after knowing she was poisoned, which is super fucking weird. They also again pointed to the affair, and also that once again Bill and Adam knew Mary had been poisoned but didn't contact the police, and that it had to be her sister who stepped in to ask them to fucking, investigate. So that is very suspicious to me. And here for me, so if I have that piece of evidence against Katie that I can't get past, here's what I can't get past in regards to Bill. Mary was in the hospital but was recovering. Was I don't know that she was holding on food, but she wasn't having vomiting or diarrhea, was saying she was feeling better and was expected to go home the next morning. Now, like I said, if you're poisoned with a non-lethal dose, you will recover. But once you are poisoned with a lethal dose, you will die. If she had been poisoned with a lethal dose at lunch when Katie had access to her, she would not have recovered as quickly as she did, even for that short period of time before ultimately getting worse and dying. It wasn't until after Bill brought her items from home that she again fell ill, and this time so ill she died. So it's really, really hard for me to get past that, because how else was she poisoned? And Katie was never at the hospital. And the other problem for me is that the police and medical examiner never tested the items that Bill brought Mary. So we will never know whether or not they contain the poison. To be clear, like I said, you can recover from colchicine poisoning if you take less than the threshold. So to me, this is just a really big what the fuck moment. Now, do I think Bill did this? Not really. But does that bug me? Yes. So in my mind, the defense did a pretty good job blaming Bill and Adam. And to recap, let me just say what we have against Katie and what we have against Adam and Bill. So Katie, we have the DNA on the colchicine bottle, the female touch DNA on the letter. She admitted to writing the letter, which had insider information. The art chemical woman said she spoke with her on the phone. Katie admitted to buying the prepaid cards. The email address was created on her work computer, also found on her phone and home computer, all of which had searches for poison, math for dosage of this poison, and deleted Facebook draft saying, "I'm so sad Mary died," before she fucking died. Adam had the symptoms 3 months before Mary's death, and Katie had access to Mary's food and drinks just before her death. Also, her track record of manipulating and lying to Adam to maintain control over him definitely comes into play. Now, for Bill and Adam, Adam could have been setting the scene with that poisoning episode and the text to her about it. And in fact, no poison was found in the rest of the pills of that bottle. So, that's interesting. They both had access to the work computer. All three of them did. They could have accessed her phone as well since there wasn't a lock on it. They were both pretty computer savvy. They had a motive for murdering Mary, which was money and to be with another woman. They didn't report the murder. Bill didn't answer his phone overnight. Bill brought her the medicine at the hospital, after which she got worse. He started dating her sister shortly after, possibly before. He knew how to use colchicine, and the letter of intent matched his level of knowledge about it. I think that's about it. Also, it's interesting that like 3 of her 4 sisters immediately suspected him. They all suspected Bill of killing her. The 4th sister started dating him, so it shows a little bit of division between the family, but it's interesting to me. And definitely family isn't always right, but it's something to think about. So while to me, it feels very much like Katie bought the poison and probably murdered Mary, there is some kind of sus behavior by the men in her life as well. and potentially a lot of reasonable doubt. However, the jury did not agree with my assessment, at least not completely. And while they didn't give Katie first or even second degree murder, they did find her guilty of first degree manslaughter, which is like a slightly lesser version of second degree murder, I guess. So she was sentenced to 23 years in prison with eligibility for parole in 2037. So basically, she's serving like 85% of her sentence before they'll even consider her for parole. Now, we're pretty much at the end of the story, but I do want to call out a few things. Now, first, there's a website dedicated to freeing Katie Conley, and you'd be pretty surprised to hear that of Mary's four sisters, like I said, not only do three believe that Bill is responsible for her death, but one of them, her sister Janine, even wrote a letter published by the Free Katie Conley site, or Free Caitlin Conley site, outlining her support for Katie and giving a point by point breakdown of why she believes Bill to be the killer. I'm not saying I agree with it, but it definitely muddies the water that a lot of her family believes that it was her ex-husband or her widower. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Was it Katie? Was she framed? Was it all of them and they turned on each other? Like what do you think? When you watch, if you go and you watch some of the recorded court, like the victim impact statements of Bill and Adam and sort of the sentencing, to me, Adam is innocent. Like he had nothing to do with this, and it really feels like Bill may have been as well. Um, Katie does seem pretty cold, pretty calculating, pretty unbothered by anything that doesn't have to do with like her own fate, kind of. Like she doesn't really say that she's sorry that Mary's dead or anything. She basically just focuses on how she's innocent, how this is a miscarriage of justice. So I think when I'm telling you the story and I'm giving all these perspectives, it's definitely interesting, but I really do think there is something to be said for like watching her police interview, which you can do. Watching some of the court stuff, kind of seeing how these people interact and how they behave, and it really, to me, points the finger a little more firmly back at Katie. But anyway, twisty little case here. Definitely was fun to research. Wow, I talked for almost an hour, you guys. That's how deep I got into this case. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope it made sense. I tried really hard to organize everything so that it was easy to follow. But if not, feel free to listen again. Give us those listens. We don't mind. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Hopefully, like I said, Diva will be back next week. If not, then hopefully the week after. We're gonna take it week by week. I'm having a great time. I hope you guys are having a great time too. So whenever she's back, we'll be super stoked. But until then, we'll hang out together. I'll keep bringing fun cases your way. And until then, definitely do your best to stay off our lists. Bye.